The vast China-Burma-India theatre became an Allied priority out of sheer necessity. It was a realm of towering mountains and suffocating jungles. An enemy whose tenacity was matched only by the environment itself waited there. Japan's relentless expansion severed China's vital supply lines through Burma. The urgent need for an overland route was undeniable. The perilous Hump airlift was a heroic feat of aviation. But it simply could not shoulder the burden alone. The world's attention often fixated on the European and Pacific fronts. Yet, it briefly turned eastward. Conferences in Quebec and Cairo solidified a commitment to renewed offensive action. They authorized the first American ground combat unit for mainland Asia. Despite this strategic imperative, the CBI theater perpetually found itself out at the end of the thinnest supply line of all. It was perpetually starved of resources. This was a distant, often forgotten struggle. China's perceived importance was, at times, more illusion than reality. This unconventional war demanded unconventional leaders. The early strategy for Burma was shaped by two of the most singular. Major General Ord C. Wingate was a fanatic of emotional, brilliant, and eccentric demeanor. He championed long-range penetration tactics. He proved their disruptive potential with his Chindit raids. He was a man who reported for duty with a fly whisk, an alarm clock, a patriarchal beard, and a pre-1914 tropical helmet. These were symbols of his utter indifference to military convention. On the other side stood Lieutenant General Joseph D. Lieutenant General Joseph W. Stilwell. He was driven by a primitive, single-minded passion to reconquer Burma. This passion stemmed from the humiliating defeat of 1942. Stilwell often cultivated the persona of a tough, hard-bitten, plain-fighting general. He maintained rough living and primitive headquarters. He envisioned revitalizing Chinese forces and engaging the enemy directly. His public pronouncements often carried a distinct anti-British edge. Yet Stilwell privately respected Admiral Lord Louis Mountbatten. He once told Mountbatten, "Admiral, I like working with you," he added. "You are the only British I have met who wants to fight." This complex dynamic was fueled by Stilwell's personal motto. That motto was, "Don't let the bastards grind you down." It set the stage for a new kind of force. The call went out from Washington for a specialized long-range penetration unit. It was codenamed Galahad. Volunteers were explicitly warned not to expect return from this dangerous and hazardous mission. For many, it was an escape from the cold nights sleeping on the ground during maneuvers in Mississippi. It was a desperate bid for a warmer climate. But for a surprising number, the vague promise of peril was an irresistible draw. A widespread convergence of volunteers upon San Francisco proved a profound desire among soldiers for active combat roles. This was true even under perilous conditions. It challenged any notion that such assignments went unsought. The narrator was swept up in this current. He felt caught up in the war. He felt he stepped backward onto a high-speed conveyor belt. He was moving swiftly towards an unknown destiny. Securing battle-tested troops from General MacArthur's command was difficult. Only 55, out of 274 requested, were received. This underscored the immense strain on personnel resources across all theaters. The formation of the 5,307th Composite Unit Provisional, Galahad, at Camp Stoneman was a chaotic affair. It was almost absurd. It was a depressing way station. Its air of improvisation felt permanent. It was a processing point for departing souls. Here, battalions were hastily constructed on paper. They came from a collection of misfits of half the divisions in the country. These were pirates and live now pay later types. The communications platoon, for instance, initially lacked any radio equipment. This forced improvisation. They used signal lamps crafted from flashlights and signal flags made at personal expense. This disparate group included figures like Major William Lloyd Osborne, a Philippines veteran. It also included Caveson Johnson, a former professional wrestler. Lieutenant Philip S. Weld, a former reporter, joined. He was alongside Lieutenant Meredith Caldwell. Caldwell chose the hazardous mission over a court-martial. This ad hoc assembly was born from inter-service rivalries. It also stemmed from high-level command disputes. These were between Stilwell, Wingate, and Mountbatten. This left the unit with an unclear purpose and shifting allegiances. Amidst this confusion, a crucial leader emerged. On January 4th, Brigadier General Frank D. Merrill assumed command. He was a 39-year-old West Pointer with a background in military intelligence. His appealing personality and shrewdness instantly uplifted the unit's morale. He transformed them from a casual detachment into a cohesive fighting force. The unit was officially christened with an unwieldy, almost comical designation. It was the 5307th Composite Unit Provisional. This name was so absurd that one soldier, Winnie Steinfeld, mocked it in a song. He sang about sinning on a super-divisional scale, yet this very absurdity, coupled with Merrill's leadership, began to forge a shared identity. It was a backhanded identity. This sense of belonging was cemented by newspaper correspondent James Shepley. He famously dubbed them Merrill's Marauders. This name instantly resonated. It provided the unit with the definitive identity it desperately needed. The deployment to India marked a brutal shift towards specialized training. After a 42-day Pacific voyage aboard the Lurline, the unit made landfall in New Caledonia. Her elegance was hidden beneath military grey paint. 670 haughty cotton suntans joined them there. These were combat veterans from the South Pacific. Their skin had a yellow colour from atabrine. It made them seem from another world. These chow raiders ate like wolves. They constantly recounted their combat experiences. They infused the unit with crucial combat knowledge. It was sometimes intimidating. The journey continued to Bombay. It was a sensory overload of mingled scents of curry, open drains, and aromatic wood smoke. It was a city of splendour and squalor. Its bazaars were sordid yet mysterious. A 2-day train ride across central India brought them to Deolali. It was through dust, dirt, and heat. Cockroaches scurried like animated cigar butts. This treeless plain was an arid tent city. It was tidy as a camp for toy soldiers. It was freezing at night and scorching by day. Here, intensive and unrelenting training commenced. Men often ate meals without sitting down. Phil Weld's notebook entries captured the grueling marches. They were across bullock-ploughed grain fields. They were moonlit treks through ancient, lightless mud houses where camels loomed in the dusk. It was a landscape of bare hills, seamed by erosion. They resembled lofty battlements crumbling with age. The challenges were immense. 700 pack animals arrived. Many mules were in a severely deteriorated state. The 160 men assigned to them largely lacked experience. Pack saddles did not fit. Animals developed sore backs. A mule even attempted to climb into a pneumatic rubber raft. This created an atmosphere of a fantasy. It underscored the improvisational nature of their preparation. Despite the chaos, a Christmas Eve revelry occurred. Soldiers fired weapons and flares into the sky. It was a scene of battle for no military reason. Officers were dancing about like satyrs. This was a testament to the pent-up tension and the desperate need for release. This haphazard, deeply personal process of unit formation and early training starkly contrasted any myth of perfectly orchestrated military formations. It revealed the raw, human reality of preparing for an unconventional war. The 5307th Composite Unit Provisional plunged into northern Burma. It was codenamed Galahad. They would soon be known as Merrill's Marauders. This land was defined by the monumental raw gash of the Ledo Road. The road itself was an engineering marvel. It was a testament to human will carved through impossible terrain. For the Marauders, it was merely the brutal conduit to their destiny. Their deployment was no grand, orchestrated maneuver. Chaotic staging at Margarita occurred. Freedom-loving pack animals created scenes of pandemonium. The men were immediately confronted by the sheer, unyielding physicality of the jungle. From the first grueling night march, the physical toll was immense. It was a constant battle against an environment that offered no quarter. Men already bone-weary grappled with the weight of their packs. Straps cut into flesh. Their bodies were perpetually soaked with sweat in the stifling, humid air. This air carried the earthy, faintly acrid odour of the jungle floor. This was no ordinary march. It was a drenching, a slow erosion by disease and sores. It was a denial of every comfort and amenity. This left them with a profound sense of isolation. It was as if they were fighting on Mars with only the supply planes overhead to connect them with the Earth. The very terrain became an adversary. The dense vegetation was a disorienting sea. Every leaf and branch formed noise traps. This demanded constant, nerve-straining vigilance. The jungle, with its meagerness of the forces engaged, was forcing two Goliaths to grapple with their fingers alone. These Goliaths were the Allies and the Japanese. The Marauders were unready and ill-equipped for what was demanded of them. They were about to clash with a seasoned Japanese enemy. This enemy was dug into established positions. The initial deployment was anything but smooth. It was a chaotic, improvised beginning. It would define their path forward. The deep penetration mission aimed to cut the crucial Kameing Road. It was an 8-day march into unknown territory. It immediately thrust them into the terrifying reality of jungle warfare. Sam Wilson's intelligence and reconnaissance platoon was from the 1st Battalion. They moved soundlessly, save for the jarring hooves of mules. They felt their umbilical cord severed the moment they were cut off behind enemy lines. Trails, usually friendly, became enemies. The once feared nighttime forest offered a blessed, if temporary, safety. The constant tremor of fear became a tangible thing. Their uniforms were blotched with the sweat of heat and dread. The longing to rejoin the regiment was a powerful undertow. Then, without warning, the jungle's hot stillness was shattered. The low-spoken injunction came down the column. "Fresh Jap tracks," it said. "Take a 5-yard interval." It continued. No talking. Weapons were unslung. Bolts were rasping and clicking ahead and behind. The eerie, unrestrained din of whooping, humorless monkey laughter presaged the inevitable. The first rattle of firing erupted. It was monstrously loud. It was a horrible moral shock. It brought the pleasant trappings of the earth to an abrupt halt. The blue sky, shimmering bamboo leaves, and trickling stream were replaced by a death's head leering into every face. Mortar fire followed. It sounded hollow, as if they were being fired inside a hogshead. Medics were called. Wounded were evacuated. Then, silence would close in again. It was like the well-oiled door of a cage. It was broken only by the sight of dead Japanese lying like dolls on the trail. This sudden, brutal shift became the Marauders' new normal. It was a shift from weary marching to tense anticipation. It was a shift from discomfort to pure terror. The grim reality of their mission was underscored by the loss of Private Robert W. Landis. He was the first Marauder killed in action. He was instantly cut down by machine gun fire. His death was a stark marker. Yet, amidst the chaos, crucial intelligence was gathered. Sam Wilson navigated through thick woods. The earth no longer felt firm underfoot. He successfully reached Tanjagar. He confirmed a vital crossing point for the Tawang River. His perilous, nerve-wracking ride back to headquarters provided Merrill with critical information. He encountered big cats. He narrowly avoided friendly fire in an early morning fog. This information was needed for the main battalions to advance. The local Kachin population was equally vital. They were unspoiled people with fine aristocratic features. They formed an immediate rapport with the Marauders. They proved invaluable. They provided essential intelligence and guides. They became a Robin Hood version of the Boy Scouts in their artful ambushes of Japanese soldiers. This demonstrated the importance of local alliances in this alien war. At the Tanai, General Merrill issued his attack orders. They were to cut the Kameing Road at Wallabum. The 2nd Battalion established a critical roadblock west of Wallabum. This forced the Japanese 18th Division to commit to a costly battle. They cut the road at Wallabum itself. The fighting was immediate and chaotic. Americans and Japanese were running into each other on every side. There was no front to speak of. A party of 7 Japanese blundered into a 3rd Battalion command post. This party included a wounded officer on a litter. They were cut down. The Marauders were in the heart of the enemy's territory. The battle for the Kameing Road was fully joined. As darkness fell, the Japanese launched repeated assaults. They were fueled by nationalistic fervor. Their cries of Sumiyu, Sume and Banzai echoed through the clearing. They underestimated the Marauders. The 3rd Battalion maintained a disciplined silence in their foxholes. They cleaned weapons and set ammunition. They held their fire. The first wave of Japanese soldiers was within 40 yards. Then, in a sudden deafening din, a combat team's 300 or 400 weapons erupted simultaneously. The sheet of fire ripped the forest apart. It barely cleared the Marauders' heads. It made eardrums rattle like tissue paper. The first rank of Japanese soldiers fell like stricken figures in a ballet. At least 350 were killed in the clearing and riverbed. Machine gun crews were decimated, yet the tenacious Japanese refused to yield. They rushed forward to man fallen weapons. They were only to be cut down in turn. Ammunition ran dangerously low. Sergeant James C. Ballard braved continuous fire for resupply. A critical shipment arrived at 8 p.m. It bolstered their security and morale. The Japanese artillery fire finally petered out. Then, a kind of madness seized the Americans. They began shouting obscenities across the river. They then unleashed the feral, doleful, spine-tingling wail of a wolf's howl. This sound must have conjured images of a legion of bloodthirsty ghouls for the enemy. At midnight, the 3rd Battalion quietly pulled out. Their withdrawal was a strategic retreat, not a rout. This was despite the overwhelming enemy pressure. The 3rd Battalion had inflicted heavy casualties on a Japanese division. They forced them to withdraw farther than they had in months. General Merrill would later confirm this. The combined Allied forces forced a greater Japanese withdrawal in 3 days than in the preceding 3 months. General Stilwell's Chinese 113th Regiment eventually arrived. This was marked by a friendly fire incident in the grey of a foggy dawn. It allowed the Marauders to disengage. The Marauders appeared like cavemen after days of combat. They passed the clean, cheerful, and philosophical Chinese soldiers. This marked the handover of the front line. Initial perceptions of failure existed within some units. This was particularly true for the 1st Battalion. Yet the broader strategic context revealed the Marauders' actions as a stunning success. They had achieved their objective. They disrupted Japanese supply lines. They paved the way for further Allied progress. This validated their aggressive tactics. It proved their resilience in the face of brutal, unforgiving warfare. The illusion of invincibility shattered. It was a fragile shield forged in the early successes of deep penetration. It shattered with the sudden, brutal reality of a new strategic threat. Colonel Osborne returned with devastating news. He was a veteran whose stoicism had become a familiar anchor. 3 Japanese divisions, fueled by an unexpected and ferocious momentum, had invaded India. They had encircled a British corps at Imphal. They cut through to Kohima. This severed vital supply lines. It sent a ripple of dread through Allied command. Compounding this crisis, General Ord Wingate perished in a plane crash. He was the eccentric visionary whose long-range penetration tactics had inspired the Marauders' very existence. His death was a stark reminder of the war's indiscriminate maw. It left a void in leadership. It left a chilling sense of vulnerability. General Stilwell was ever the pragmatist. He responded with a radical shift. The 5,307th was a unit honed for aggressive raiding behind enemy lines. It was abruptly reassigned to a static defensive role. Their new objective was not to strike. It was to delay and to hold ground. It was to prevent the surging Japanese from outflanking Chinese forces. It was also to prevent them from seizing critical communication arteries. Or men trained to move fast and hit hard. This was a wrenching departure. It was a strategic twist. It implicitly challenged any notion of a straightforward, victorious campaign. Thus, the Marauders embarked on another arduous flank march. It was a grueling 80-odd-mile trek to Inkangatan Jangatang. It was completed in a staggering 11 days. This time, their objective was to undermine Japanese defences at Jambu Bum. This task was complicated by Stilwell's decision to divide the 5,307th. Merrill and Hunter had cautioned against this move. The jungle was already a relentless adversary. It intensified its assault. Increasing downpours turned trails into deep, sucking mud. The abrasive sand filtering into their shoes caused agonizing sores. The once feared nighttime forest now offered no blessed safety. Every step was a battle against the terrain itself. Progress was painstakingly slow. One account noted, over 30 miles took more than 2 weeks. 8 actions were fought to advance just a mile and a half. The environment became the primary enemy. Men hacked a passage through towering, tangled vegetation. The young bamboos slashed like saber blades. The older, steel-like stems resisted dulled machetes. This man-killing labor was likened to a column of slaves. It left them perpetually soaked with sweat. They gasped for breath. Straps cut into flesh. Dysentery was the scourge of the organization. It reduced many to walking dead. Repulsive little rubbery monsters, leeches, caused constant bleeding. Their anticoagulant saliva left the mules' fetlocks perpetually dark red and slimy. This was a war fought against nature itself. It was a relentless erosion of body and spirit. Their lifeline remained precarious. It was airdrops. The distant drone of an airplane broke the jungle's monotony. Phil Weld found it the homiest sound since selling his Model A Ford. It brought a fever of anticipation. But even this vital connection was fraught with tension. Heated altercations occurred between air liaison officers and pilots over the radio. Cargo was scattered all over the landscape. 2 drop planes and their crews were lost before the campaign ended. This was a stark reminder of the risks. In a surreal twist, Lieutenant James L. Tilley emerged from the jungle. He was an OSS officer leading a 50-strong force of Kachin Rangers. He was utterly unaware of the Marauders' presence and vice versa. This unexpected encounter highlighted the fragmented nature of the Allied effort. Tilley cautiously called out, "Hey, Yank, don't shoot." It implicitly debunked any idea of perfectly coordinated operations. The fight for critical trail junctions soon became a desperate race. On March 25th, the 2nd Battalion and half of the 3rd, under Colonel McGee, reached Inkangatogtok. They hastily dug in on a vulnerable plain. For an entire day, the Japanese launched 16 fierce attacks. Their motor transport brought up artillery. Marauders fought desperately. They repelled each assault. They inflicted over 200 Japanese dead. Yet, the 5,307th suffered 2 killed and 12 wounded. Realizing the Japanese were surrounding them, McGee ordered a desperate retreat. It was under a downpour so heavy that holes had to be cut in the litters carrying the wounded. This was to prevent them from filling with water. The Japanese pressed their advance from the south. They threatened to outmaraud the Marauders. This necessitated a desperate scramble to secure key trail junctions north of Oke. It was in this desperate moment that Lieutenant Warren R. Smith performed a historic action. He was commanding a rifle platoon. Every Marauder would regard it as such. He was tasked with blocking a crucial trail against overwhelming Japanese odds. Smith, using his Tommy gun, personally covered his men's withdrawal. This was across an open stretch under heavy fire. His courageous actions bought crucial time for the main force. They passed a critical juncture. He prevented immediate encirclement. He inflicted over 60 Japanese casualties in a 2-hour battle. But the reprieve was short-lived. On the 3rd day after reaching Enjpum Go, the trail to Esamsingyang was lost. This isolated the 2nd Battalion. General Merrill, the unit's commander, was incapacitated by a heart attack. This shifted effective command to the disciplined but weary Colonel Hunter. It created a truly desperate situation. The siege of Entupunga had begun. The perimeter was a mere 400 yards long. It was 100 to 250 yards wide. It became a crucible of suffering. The stench of 75 to 112 animal carcasses mingled. They were killed by enemy fire. It mingled with inadequately buried excrement and decomposing Japanese bodies. The only available water was foul, muddy, and nearly stagnant. It was barely drinkable even for men desperate with thirst. Doctors lacked water for plaster casts. Sulfadiazine had to be taken dry. The overwhelming Japanese artillery and mortar fire degraded conditions and morale. It forced men to frantically dig foxholes with helmets and picks. They endured an end-of-the-world feeling as shells whinnied overhead like evil buzzards. Major Rogoff, the battalion surgeon, wisely assigned psychoneurotics to digging trenches. This was an unexpected therapeutic side effect in the face of sheer terror. Amidst this hell, crucial intelligence offered a glimmer of hope. Sergeant Roy Matsumoto intercepted Japanese communications. He was a Japanese-American Nisei soldier. He defied the prejudice his background often invited. His remarkable insights allowed for effective defensive tactics and ambushes. This included booby-trapped foxholes. They accounted for approximately 200 Japanese killed during the siege. Matsumoto's bravery and resourcefulness proved invaluable. It highlighted the profound contributions of Japanese-American soldiers. They fought for a country that interned their families. The turning point for the beleaguered 2nd Battalion came on April 2nd. 2 pack howitzers arrived at Hasamsingyang. They were dropped in sections. They generated a fever of anticipation among the volunteer crews. By 11:30 a.m., the first round from these howitzers screamed over the Japanese line. The next day, Colonel Hunter held a staff meeting. This was after receiving an urgent message for help. His decisive order cut through the anxiety. "Gentlemen," he said, "in the morning we start an attack that will drive through to the 2nd Battalion." He continued, "It may take 2 or 3 days, but we will get through." The fighting culminated on Easter Sunday. Captain Tom Senf executed a daring flanking maneuver. He led a combat team of 250 fit men. They threaded through dense forests and clearings. It was an arduous trek. 5 men collapsed from exhaustion. 1 suffered a serious fall. They encountered an overpowering stench of death. It came from bloated animal carcasses, resembling a field of giant melons, and from dead men. Their successful maneuver cut off the Japanese escape route. It led to a final intense push up a steep slope. 20 men were killed or wounded in 5 assaults there. NH Pumgay was finally captured. The scene was horrific. The bamboo forest resembled a wheat field over which a herd of cattle had stampeded. Trees were macerated with bullet holes. About 400 Japanese dead were counted. The American forces had suffered 103 wounded, needing evacuation. Enchapkomgar was secured. It was a testament to the 5,307th's tenacity. Yet the cost was immense. The victory was bittersweet, the true vanquisher of the Marauders. It became increasingly clear was not solely the Japanese soldier. It was the pervasive and debilitating diseases of the Burma theatre. Casualties from amoebas, bacteria, rickettsia, and viruses were considerably higher than those from direct combat. This challenged the very notion that warfare is solely about direct engagement with the enemy. The psychological and physical toll foreshadowed the immense human cost of future operations. It was a grim testament to the alien nature of their protracted struggle. The strategic drive for Myitkyina represented a critical American objective in the brutal Burma campaign. It was a name whispered with a mix of hope and dread through the ranks. Its capture was not merely a territorial gain. It was a desperate necessity to expand the perilous Hump airlift. It would establish a vital buffer zone. Crucially, it would deny the Japanese a strategic airstrip that could pivot the war in the region. Yet, beneath this grand strategic vision lay a dangerous miscalculation. Both Allied and Japanese command underestimated the true human and logistical costs. In their pursuit of this critical prize, they clung to the illusion of a swift, decisive victory. They believed it could be had without a crippling investment of blood and resources. The unforgiving reality of Burma would quickly expose this fallacy. For Merrill's Marauders, the architects of this audacious thrust, the campaign for Myitkyina was less a fresh offensive. It was more a continuation of an already terminal decline. The hard-won tactical success at Enpumgar had critically depleted the 5,307th. This fact was tragically downplayed by Stilwell's headquarters. It was an oversight that would lead to consequences of great magnitude. Now, already shadows of their former selves, the Marauders were ordered on another grueling clandestine march towards Myitkyina. The monsoon had arrived. It transformed the landscape into a quagmire. An inch of rain fell daily. It turned trails into rivers of knee-deep mud. The land steamed under a smothering, relentless combination of heat and moisture. Men dragged themselves over rain-beaten mountain trails. They were often too weary to even curse. They succumbed to fever and exhaustion. They sat bent over their weapons, barely able to move. The 3rd Battalion, for instance, lost 20 mules. This was a staggering 2 tons of equipment. Myitkyina was still a daunting 60 miles away. This profound disconnect between frontline suffering and the distant command was palpable. Soldiers felt the Northern Combat Area Command was either ignorant of their shape, indifferent to it, or out of its mind. The environmental assault was relentless. Beyond the physical exhaustion and gnawing hunger, a new enemy had taken root within their ranks. It was a mysterious mite-borne typhus. It was often simply referred to as fever of unknown origin or accumulation of everything. This insidious internal threat proved more damaging than direct combat. It evacuated scores of men. They appeared as glinting-eyed, unshaven scarecrows. A moment of defiant absurdity occurred at Norbum. A directive from Colonel Osborne to clean up and look presentable was met with deep resentment. It culminated in Major Carson Johnson's near-insubordinate refusal to shave his distinctive red beard. This was a small but potent act of personal rebellion against the madness. The arduous Kumon ranges presented a man-killing labor. Mules struggled immensely. Some slid 50 yards on their haunches. Others bounded like monster rabbits up grades. This nearly dehumanized their handlers in the unending battle of the mules. Yet, even amidst this bleakness, the human spirit found strange outlets. A French-Canadian non-com displayed an irrepressible insouciance. This was despite his filthy sodden fatigues. He was wasted by fever. He sang jauntily amidst the drumming monsoon showers. A subtle contrast emerged between American and Chinese soldiers. Americans, driven by a what-the-hell-did-you-expect-anyway spirit, often disregarded water discipline. The Chinese, seen by some as kids, showed admirable fortitude, endurance, and cheerfulness. They methodically boiled their drinking water. They maintained a way of life on the march. The clandestine approach to Mike Kiana demanded daring reconnaissance and meticulous planning. Sam Wilson's initiative to scout across the Mogong River provided the vital intelligence. It was a feat of stealth and courage already recounted. Colonel Osborne received Wilson's report. He made swift decisions. He emphasized absolute stealth. "Keep your men from firing as long as you can," he ordered. "Whatever they do, they mustn't start shooting while it's still dark." He added, "If they get in a jam, it's to be knives or bayonets." Even Major Pafson Johnson personally scouted the river crossing at midnight. He was suffering from severe amoebic dysentery. He waded into armpit-deep water. Platoon leader Phil Weld endured a night of intense personal anxiety. This was on the eve of the assault. He battled fear and prayed. He silently reassured an imagined image of his wife. "Don't worry," he thought. "We'll just take it easy and it'll turn out all right." To draw Japanese attention, Colonel Kinnison's 3rd Battalion conducted a costly feint to Tinkrukong. It was an engagement that proved inconclusive. It tied up significant forces. The author sustained an injury during a mortar attack. He was evacuated. This was a personal twist of fate. He transitioned from active participant to a distant observer of the war. Meanwhile, Colonel Hunter's main force pressed on. On May 17th, after a grueling march, the Marauders achieved their primary objective. The Mitikina airstrip was successfully seized. Stilwell received the coded "in the ring" message. It was followed by "Mutant of Venice." This signified the Marauders had achieved their objective. It was an initial triumph. It was a critical strategic gain that opened the door for reinforcement. From the captured airstrip, the dazed and utterly spent Marauders watched the subsequent Chinese assault on Maitkina. It was as if it were a football game or a motion picture. They observed bugle calls, rushing figurines and mortar shell geysers, but the initial triumph quickly dissolved into chaos. It revealed critical logistical failures and profound command disorganization. The airstrip's strategic importance was clear. Meticulously drawn plans for supply and reinforcement were crafted by General Merrill and Colonel Hunter. Yet they were not carried out. Instead, conflicting orders and a profound lack of communication from higher echelons reduced the 5,307th to a visiting unit. It was without clear directives or support. The Chinese 150th Regiment suffered 671 casualties. Their loyalty was not solely to Stilwell. This was due to a series of disastrous friendly fire incidents. On the afternoon of May 17th, 2 battalions were sent against the town. They only confused and shot each other. The blunder was repeated the next day. The regiment panicked during a 3rd attempt. American liaison officer Lieutenant Colonel William H. Combs later died of wounds. He had reported on the Chinese attitude of "no food, no ammo, no move." He died while warning a unit of an ambush. It was a tragic testament to the disarray. The tide turned decisively against the Allies. Japanese reinforcements began pouring into Maitkina by May 22nd. 800 men were in Charpate. 200 were crossing the river. Stilwell grimly dubbed this day Black Monday. Allied intelligence had grossly underestimated the Japanese garrison. It numbered 4,600 at one point. Stilwell's strength never exceeded 12,000. It was often half that number during the crisis. The initial American advantage evaporated. It was replaced by a desperate defensive struggle for the town. In a desperate move, Stilwell exerted extremely heavy moral pressure on medical officers. He wanted them to return every American who could pull a trigger to the front. He even recalled convalescents who had been promised recuperation. New Galahad personnel were hastily flown to Maitkikina. They totaled 2,600. 2 engineer battalions from the Lado Road were also flown in. They were repurposed as infantry under Colonel Hunter. These green American troops were profoundly unprepared. Many had not seen a rifle since their basic training days. They lacked teamwork, having only met days before deployment. Captain Robert P. Maxon testified about infantry companies. They comprised MPs, tank drivers, and even a laundry machine operator. Lieutenant Lewis B. Mitchell vividly recounted organizing a weapons platoon. He taught men how to load, aim, and fire 50 caliber machine guns on June 4th. He trained them on mortars and heavy 30 caliber machine guns the next day. This was before an attack on June 5th. These inexperienced troops were nervous at the start. They were often terrified. There were instances of engineer units breaking and running under fire. Maitkikina, far from a swift victory, was rapidly devolving into a prolonged, costly, and desperate siege. The siege of Mitkina devolved into a prolonged, chaotic, and costly ordeal. It was intended as the strategic capstone of the North Burma campaign. It was a testament to ambition, unchecked by reality. General Stilwell's drive was fueled by a desire to burn up the Limeys and reclaim Burma. It had led his forces over 500 miles. But his excessive secrecy and inadequate supply plans for the Marauders left them isolated. They were adrift in a maelstrom of conflicting directives. The initial triumph of seizing the airstrip quickly soured. It turned into a desperate, grinding battle. Command was already destabilized by General Merrill's second heart attack and subsequent evacuation. It fractured further under ill-equipped successors. They inherited a situation that was critical. It only grew worse. Desperate measures followed desperate times. The order to recall convalescent 5,307th troops back to Maitkikina signaled the severity of the crisis. It was a cruel betrayal of promises for recuperation. 200 Marauders were forced back to the front. They were alongside 250 earlier evacuees. New Galahad personnel were hastily flown in. They totaled 2,600. Engineer battalions repurposed as infantry were also flown in. These green American troops were profoundly unprepared. Many had not seen a rifle since their basic training days. They lacked any semblance of teamwork. They had only met days before deployment. Captain Robert P. Maxon recalled infantry companies. They comprised MPs, tank drivers, and even a laundry machine operator. Lieutenant Lewis B. Mitchell vividly remembered teaching men to load and fire 50 caliber machine guns on June 4th. He then trained them on mortars and heavy 30 calibers the very next day. This was before an attack on June 5th. These inexperienced troops were nervous at the start. They were often terrified. Engineer units broke and ran under fire. Their fear was palpable as the lethargy of war hung over Maitkina. The fear of Maitkina, indeed, brooded over that camp. It was like the literal figure of death. Reserves of food and ammunition were perilously low. 50 individual cases were recognized as psychopathic. This was a stark measure of the mental unraveling. The immense physical and psychological toll of the Maitkina siege led to an almost complete breakdown of morale. This was within the 5,307th. It was a unit pushed far beyond its breaking point. War Department promises of a 3-month mission, followed by rest and hospitalization, were not met. Their deployment stretched to 5 months and beyond. The physical deterioration was agonizing to witness. Men were reduced to gaunt, fanatic-eyed, and for the most part bearded Indian holy men. Their bodies were ravaged by disease and exhaustion. Perceived failures in hospitalization exacerbated a profound sense of injustice. This was despite efforts by medics like Lou Kolodny. They tried to prevent the premature return of convalescents. Soldiers felt a deep resentment. It was an imputation of inadequacy. Their hard-won successes only led to more unrealistic demands from Stilwell. The stark contrast between their frontline suffering and the comfort of rear echelon personnel fueled a bitter sense of being cheated. The author's luxurious New Delhi dormitory exemplified this. It was compared to the unit's pest hole rest camp. This morale breakdown manifested in a visceral coming apart of the unit. The 5,307th was ravaged by casualties and exhaustion. It simply trickled away. The rest camp at Dinjan became a pest hole. It was rife with theft, violence, and the illicit use of local spirits. Bullfight brandy turned men into maniacs. In a chilling moment, a staff sergeant calmly admitted to self-inflicted wounds. He told Lieutenant Phil Weld, "There'll be a lot more doing the same, Lieutenant, if you don't get us the hell out of here." This was a desperate plea. Weld addressed it by speaking directly to his men. He prevented an epidemic of self-harm. Mikey Kiner, in its brutal reality, debunked the public narrative of the tough Marauders simply cracking up. It revealed instead a systemic failure of support and unfulfilled promises. The critical state of the Marauders and the systemic failures of the campaign were laid bare. Colonel Hunter penned a scathing indictment of higher headquarters from his foxhole. He was a disciplined leader. He was stripped to fatigue trousers. His physical weariness was evident in the unnaturally prominent sinews of his arms and trunk. His report was a damning expose of indifference and neglectfulness. It risked his career but exposed the truth. The final declaration was that the 5,307th was unfit for further employment. It had lost over 2,000 men. This was a mere formality. They were already just shot. The unit was deactivated on August 10, 1944. The abrupt relief of Colonel Hunter occurred on August 3rd. This was just 2 days after Stilwell's promotion to full general. It symbolized the end of any hope for immediate internal restoration. It left the unit's valor to shine through despite its physical and moral degradation. The breakdown of the 5,307th was not a failure of courage or stamina. It was a tragic consequence of systemic failures and broken promises. The capture of Maidkina on August 3rd was costly. Yet, it eventually secured a vital airstrip. This victory was aided by successful breakthroughs from Chinese and British forces. They were in the Mogang Valley and Kameing. This opened supply lines and cut off Japanese reinforcements. It eventually led to General Mizukami's suicide. His remaining 600 men escaped. However, the broader strategic goals for China were not fully realized. Political friction, a constant shadow over the CBI theater, escalated. It was between Stilwell and Chiang Kai-shek. Stilwell was a warm-hearted, cultured human being beneath his vinegar Joe shell. He was ultimately recalled in October 1944. This was a political victory for Chiang. Chiang desired to preserve military supplies. He championed Claire Chennault's cheap and easy air power-centric strategy. This outcome was predicted by Stilwell and the US Chiefs of Staff. It led to the Japanese moving virtually at will in China. They captured all American bases east of Kunming bases. It left nothing to show for all the effort and expense involved. The CBI theater profoundly challenged the notion of a cheap and easy way to win wars. This was particularly true when crucial ground forces were starved. It was in favor of an unproven air power strategy. Despite the bitter end, the enduring legacy of Merrill's Marauders became a profound metaphor. It was for human resilience and the true cost of war. Official recognition preserved their valor. This was through the Distinguished Unit Award. It was despite the unit's final breakdown. The 5,307th's provisional status contributed to its eventual dissolution. So did the critical lack of provisions for replacements. Yet its legacy was preserved through successor units. These included the 475th Infantry Regiment. Symbolic insignia featuring elephant tusks and crossed kukris also preserved it. The Marauders' experience became a microcosm of the human condition. It was facing life's challenges with insufficient resources, yet it was finding the strength to continue. Lieutenant Meredith Caldwell offered a poignant perspective. He reflected on their future pride. "The time will come," he said. "You will realize that you were with the Green Mountain Boys and Mad Anthony Wayne's Indian fighters and Morgan's Raiders." He added, "And being as big an idiot as I am, you will wonder how anyone as fearful and unworthy as you could have been included in such a glorious company." Sam Wilson was a veteran of that brutal campaign. He articulated the essence of courage and survival. "I could command one foot to move out in front of the other one," he stated. "You just have to take the next step." Driven by a profound sense of irremediable loss and the transience of what has been, the author embarked on a quest. It was to document their story. This was a vital act of reconstructing and preserving these experiences. This endeavor challenged the idea that time is purely destructive. It revealed instead that time is not necessarily all-consuming after all. The enduring power of friendship offered a profound counter to the cold that descends upon the earth from empty space. It was like love. It transcended the law of the conservation of energy by generating warmth where nothing was before. Furthermore, the experience of Galahad-type forces continues to hold lasting strategic significance. These were small, free-ranging units unhampered by fixed ties with their bases. It is a crucial lesson for future warfare in an era of decentralized conflict. The Marauders' story is a testament to this fact. True valor lies not in invincibility, it lies in the persistent act of moving forward, despite every piece is unto a desperated.